Okay, greetings YouTube land. Um, I haven't created a YouTube video in feels like a few months. The main reason is because I'm not teaching. I haven't been teaching, and most of my YouTube videos are related to my classes that I teach. But also, I've been uh, on a big journey voyage, and so that's what I wanted to chat about here. What I'm doing, and a little bit on why, and maybe a little bit on what's to come here. So, for loved ones, friends who might be interested to track what I'm doing out here in another part of the world, I'm in Vietnam. So, I'm just talk about like what the heck's going on. Why am I in Vietnam? Um, and for anyone else who's interested in uh, learning a little bit more about Vietnam and my unique, hopefully unique take on it. Um, there's going to be, a fair bit about food and culture and just observations as I'm coming along here. So, why am I spending the summer in Vietnam? I have been here already for over a month. I got to Ho Chi Minh City on May 24, 25. I left LA on May 24, or sorry, 25. It was the day after my son's birthday. We went out to Disneyland as a whole family and had a great day together in Disneyland. And the next day I hopped on a plane and came to Ho Chi Minh City, where I promptly got COVID first time. Finally happened. I was on planes for, 13 hours, and Disneyland was so crowded. And I don't think I saw anyone wearing masks at Disneyland. So I probably got COVID at Disneyland. And so my first week was basically a write-off. I felt so terrible. I did manage to get out a little bit, but it was a tough first week. I got scammed on the first rental apartment that I had booked. I spent like $700 that I had to try to, track down, and it was a nightmare. And I stayed in like four different places in 4 nights while having COVID. So the start of this journey was pretty rough. Finally found a place where I could stay for 3 weeks, thereabouts, and finally got over COVID after a couple of like waves of it. And then I began my focused reason for being here. So I just wanted to chat a little bit about that whole kind of process of like, what brought me to Vietnam, and, what am I up to here? Um, I'm going to do a series of these videos. I think the plan is to do maybe a half dozen or so, just sort of thinking out loud about the stuff that I'm noticing as a food enthusiast and as a critical scholar of culture and material culture and taste. And I'm thinking about calling this series Relations, as in international relations, as in intercultural relations, as in human-human relations, as in human environment relations, as in material cultural relations. I'm really interested in, points of contact between people and spaces, and how practices take shape, and specifically around food and food culture. Um, and This first video I'm thinking about titling something like Research and Resurgence, in terms of the why I came to Vietnam. Research is the main purpose of it, and also resurgence. I'll start with resurgence because there's sort of like a personal and professional side to this. We've all been through a really rough time in the last few years in the United States, and everywhere. But the U.S. I feel like has been especially and I feel like unnecessarily difficult in many ways. And it's the pandemic, it's the toxic political culture, it is, you know, natural devastations and storms, and now it's mass shootings by the day, it seems. And as someone who's an academic, a scholar who studies public culture, it's long been my job to stay as informed as possible on essentially what's happening out in the streets of the country, in terms of how the people are gathering and how they're interacting and relating and communicating, and how that bubbles up into political realities. And I got to say, for the last couple of years, it's become really, really difficult to just do that basic work of staying abreast and keeping on touch of what's happening, such that it's begun to feel almost like consuming poison, where it's really weighing my soul down. And it's become very difficult to teach my classes. There's certain classes that I just don't want to teach anymore because they're too challenging to even try to wrap my arms around. I used to teach a class on a thing called the public sphere. I haven't taught that class in a number of years now because I don't really know how to do it anymore. Maybe there's a way, but it's just entering into the mess, into the fray, into the constant nastiness and the decay of our political culture right now is really disheartening. It's really soul crushing. And so I have found myself really struggling to do my basic job. And what has given me a, an opportunity for some sense of excitement and some sense of inspiration has been in my own kind of more private time. Is I love to cook. I love to research food and recipes and techniques and try them out. And so throughout most of the pandemic, when a lot of my colleagues were writing their articles and going to conferences, even if they're online conferences, I was spending my weekends in Chinatown in Las Vegas, which is one of the greatest places. I always say this, it's my favorite part of Las Vegas. And I was looking for specific ingredients. I was testing out recipes. I was just exploring and creating and connecting to something that I truly love and that's sort of always there, that's always there in a nourishing way. And I just kind of found myself gravitating in that direction and started thinking about possibilities. And so I have a big project in mind here, a venture, and it's become an adventure, and it's an enterprise, and it's a preneur that I don't want to say too much about right now because it's still a fair ways off. But this requires a fair bit of research. I'm really focusing hard on the cuisine of Vietnam. I came to Vietnam a few times about a decade ago, and really just fell in love with the place. And just one of those like love at first sight kind of experiences, where I just found myself kind of like in tears, and tears of joy and tears of sadness. There's a lot of painful history here, but there's a lot of beauty, and there's a lot of nourishment, and a lot of I think authentic, ways of living, and it's a lot of that is expressed through the food. And so I've just been like kind of obsessed with Vietnamese food and food culture for a while now, but I became really kind of focused on this over the last couple of years. And so I decided to take a couple of months and actually come out here and really immerse myself in the three major regions of the country. So I did 3 weeks in Saigon. Ho Chi Minh City is now what it's called, but Saigon's two syllables and Ho Chi Minh City's five. So I tend to say Saigon. So spent 3 weeks there, even though about half of that was impacted by COVID, but I still managed to cover a lot of ground. And really what I'm focusing on is as much about the food and the food culture as I can. The dishes, the traditions, the practices, the rituals, the norms, the ingredients, what is eaten, when is it eaten, why is it eaten in this particular way, what are the variations, and so on. And then the second leg of the journey is the one I'm wrapping up now, and that's in the middle part of the country. I started out in Da Nang, and I did about 10 days there, and then I came down where I am right now to Hoi An, which is about 30 minutes drive south of Da Nang. It's right on the coast. There's an old town here that's really beautiful in the evenings and lovely to walk around, and that's a big draw for a lot of tourists, specifically Asian tourists. There's not a lot of Western folks. There's more actually in Hoi An than I noticed in Da Nang. But this is a major tourist destination if you're from Korea, if you're from China, Japan, all over the Eastern Hemisphere here. And so it's cool to see, that kind of dynamic playing out. And then in another week and a half or so, I'm going to be heading on up north to Hanoi and spending my last about 2 weeks up there. And I'm trying to cover as much of the country as I can in 2 months. The original plan was to stay longer, but they're only doing 1 month visas right now. They're called an e visa. And I actually had to extend that already, which required a day-long trip in a SUV with four other people to Laos. It was like a 5 hour drive into the mountains. You go into Laos, you get a visa to go into Laos, only to turn right around and come back into Vietnam so that you can get a stamp on your new 1 month e-visa. And I didn't really feel like going through that a second time. And plus, 2 months is plenty in terms of being away from my family and my life back home. So that's the general kind of shape of this journey. And like I say, it's driven by the need to get away from this horribly intense, toxic culture that has become the norm in the U.S. today, and it's really weighing me down, and really taking a toll on my mental health and my emotional health. And there's a few other more personal reasons for coming out, but in terms of just the kind of that feeling of heaviness and feeling stuck and stagnant, and you know not really inspired to do the work that I've enjoyed doing for a decade, close to 2 decades now. And so this is a new possible phase of my work and my personal interests. And so I'm having the time of my life out here in Vietnam. So the resurgence part is important in terms of like stepping away from the fray, the kind of the insanity of U.S. culture right now. And the other part of it is research. And so the research that I'm doing, if anyone's familiar with the work that the scholarship that I produce or the classes that I teach, that I'm really interested in food and ecology, and taste is sort of like what ties everything together. I'm interested in material culture in the sense of like the hard physical realities of how people live and what they do, and how they interact with their immediate physical surroundings and others around them, and what are the conditions and what are the constraints, and how do people make the best out of where they find themselves. And I'm really fascinated by place. And what I'm finding in Vietnam is I thought I knew a fair bit about the food here, but you come here and you realize just how much variation there is, and also you realize how much of that variation is driven by place itself and what's available, and the different kind of temperature and climate situations, and the different kind of just the weather itself is a big part of what affects the variations in the dishes. And so I'm here looking at material culture through food, through the taste of the food, through the way that things are created, through the available resources. I'm interested in this rhetorical business of invention, but I'm interested in it at the level of cuisine. And that's going to tell me a lot about material culture in general. And I might end up writing some stuff about this because there's a lot to say. But it's also just helping me learn a lot more about Vietnamese food, Vietnamese cuisine, the people, the regions, the traditions. And I'm really interested in this business of cuisine as collision. So I want to wrap up here pretty quick, but I have ideas for another half dozen or so videos, and one of them is this notion of cuisine as collision. Collision between people and place, and between, thinking about the colonial history here, the French colonial history in Vietnam, but even before that, the Chinese colonial history. Vietnam has been a place of constant invasion and disruption, and food bears the marks of all of that. And it's so interesting how delicious, incredible dishes have histories that are so filled with pain and sorrow and injustice and violence. And so I'm trying to be mindful of all of these things. I'm trying to track how collisions bubble up into delicious food, right? And so I have a video idea on the coffee culture here in Vietnam. I have ideas on specific dishes and their variations. And so I hope to get into a lot of this. But I just wanted to begin by saying kind of hello to whoever's listening. And thanks for listening to me sort of talk out loud about my experiences. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to kind of document and record my thoughts, because I'm having lots of them. And I've been such in go, go, go mode here for the first month of my trip that I haven't really been able to kind of sit down and kind of organize my thoughts. And I want to do that now before it's too late. So be on the lookout for more to come, and see you.